This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get access to CuriosityStream and my streaming service Nebula, and watch my Nebula exclusive video Debater Theater by going to curiositystream.com/SarahZ and using my coupon code SarahZ at checkout. So a few weeks ago, I did this video on Dear Evan Hansen, and I had this throwaway line about really not liking Mean Girls the musical, or at the very least not really liking its music. And since then, I've had a lot of comments from both fans and critics of the musical wanting to know more. Normally this wouldn't be my kind of content, at least not anymore. I don't generally like doing shorter form videos criticizing media. It seems a little passé, seems a little vintage Sarah. But it's the holiday seasons, it's cold out, it's dark, maybe we're in the mood for something quick and simple and perhaps a little bit cozy. And I do think this is an interesting little segue from talking about adapting from stage to screen. I spoke so much in my last video about the changes you have to make when you take a musical and make it a film. But what about the changes in store when you take a film and make it a musical? Mean Girls is a show that very much exemplifies those challenges, and at least in my own opinion, didn't necessarily rise to them, and I just think that's an interesting little thing to talk about. So settle in, grab a cup of hot chocolate, and let's just chat for a little bit about Mean Girls the musical. What its deal is, why I don't think it works, and what this says about the landscape of musicals going forward. Let's do this. So, for the uninitiated, Mean Girls the musical is, as its name might suggest, a musical adaptation of the Mean Girls movie. Mean Girls is a film that came out in 2004 starring Lindsay Lohan, and it's very much considered a staple in the teen chick flick genre. The movie was actually based on a non-fiction book designed for parents who are trying to help their daughters survive this weird world of cliques and gossip. Tina Fey, who you might know from 30 Rock and Kimmy Schmidt and that excellent T1J video about how she's really into inserting racial humor into everything, read the book, was like, wow, the landscape of teen girlhood is kind of vicious and fucked up, isn't it? That'd sure make a good movie, I should write that. And then she wrote that and got Mark Waters, who did the Freaky Friday remake, to direct. For those of you who haven't seen the film, which I can imagine makes up like 2 of you, Mean Girls centers around a teenage girl named Katie who, for all her life, has been homeschooled in Africa. No specific country mentioned, just Africa, by her biologist parents. They've recently moved back to the States, and she's going to high school for the very first time, something for which she is woefully underprepared. Katie is thrust into this world of gossip, cliques, and subterfuge, and this clique of mean girls called the Plastics essentially take her under their wing, largely because their leader Regina feels threatened by her. Meanwhile, Katie befriends these 2 art kids, Janice and Damien, who hate Regina and want to ruin her life, and immediately start using Katie as a vessel to sabotage Regina and try to take her down. Over time, Katie becomes more and more entrenched in these school politics of gossip and cliquiness and disregarding the people around her and her own interests and authentic self, until she is so deep into it that she finds herself the de facto leader of the Plastics and is barely able to recognize herself. Eventually, after she's become so far gone that she's fucked up most of her relationships and friendships, she hits this low point and ends up realizing that this high school cruelty and drive for revenge are ultimately unproductive and self-destructive, and works to grow and better herself. If you haven't seen this movie, one of the most notable elements of its continued survival as a classic is how insanely quotable it is.
Boo, you whore.
Mean Girls is packed toe-to-tip with one-liners, quips, funny observations, or just lines that are over the top and memorable enough to bust out whenever the situation demands for it.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
It's also notable that interest and respect for Mean Girls has only grown with time. While it was pretty well received as a teen comedy when it came out, it became a far bigger cultural juggernaut years later, with tons of BuzzFeed-like sites constantly sharing GIFs and quotes and quizzes pertaining to the show, and always quote Mean Girls being a staple of Tumblr culture for years, and celebrities and politicians quoting it near constantly. This film really resonated with people, and it has an incredible staying power that not a lot of the comedies from that era do. It definitely has its problems that have only further stuck out with age. Just like, for starters, the racism that exists in this movie rarely gets talked about, but is very much present. In particular, the Asian characters, whose names are mashups of Korean and Vietnamese, being super promiscuous and over-sexualized, and having them being preyed on a teacher, being played for laughs, just plays on some really awful historical stereotypes about Asian women. Or the weird handling of the character Janice's sexuality is something that didn't get spoken about in as much detail at the time, but sticks out a bit weirdly now. So the character is named Janice Ian. She's named after a real-life musician who is well known for being a lesbian. She's very much coded this way throughout the show, and her only friend besides Katie is another gay person. There's an entire subplot where Janice is bullied and ostracized for apparently being a lesbian. She even gets called homophobic slurs repeatedly.
Oh my god, it's her dream come true, diving into a big pile of girls.
And then at the end, they just pair her up with a guy. And the joke is that people think she's a lesbian, but she's actually Lebanese, like that's the joke. But it just ends up being very weird to name a character after a famous lesbian and have her bullied throughout the entire show for being gay, and having multiple female characters make digs at her being attracted to them, and having her big fuck you moment be yelling about this, and then just giving her a boyfriend at the very last minute.
Really, I don't know why I did it. I guess it's probably because I've got a big lesbian crush on you. Suck on that!
It's something that isn't surprising given that the film came out in a much less LGBT-friendly time, but it's also something that doesn't entirely sit right with me on rewatches. It's still very much a movie that I enjoy, but it's got its flaws. So when they announced a musical adaptation of Mean Girls back in 2016, I was cautiously optimistic. I love musicals, as y'all know, and there have been some fairly successful screen-to-stage adaptations in the past. You know, I like Billy Elliot, and I think Thoroughly Modern Millie is a great show, or I'm a fan of Heathers. I mean, I even like Legally Blonde, even though I was in that show in high school and played Chutney, and for some reason our director really wanted a real-life golf cart to be in like 2 scenes, so he rented an actual golf cart for our stage production of Legally Blonde and just drove it around, and it got like 20 seconds of stage time total, and we were teenagers, we couldn't drive a golf cart, so it was just our director, who looked like Colin Robinson and very much not a high schooler, having to drive it, and just sitting there on stage around us, the teenagers, while we did our acting. And apparently renting this fucking golf cart cost so much that it put our theater program into debt, which is why the Into the Woods cast the year after barely got any set pieces to work with and had to do this weird abstract minimalist staging that didn't work at all because of this stupid fucking golf cart. But while I have some trauma from Legally Blonde, I think it broadly works well, and Tina Fey actually got one of the 2 people who did the music for that one to do the music for the Mean Girls musical. For the most part, Mean Girls the musical follows the story of Mean Girls pretty much one-to-one. There are no major character changes, there are actually scenes that nearly verbatim follow the script from the movie, no crazy additions or subtractions, and generally no glaring elements that need addressing. One thing that's notable is that the narrator has changed. In the film, Katie narrated her own story with little voiceovers, sometimes remarking on how different or similar Girl World was from the world she grew up in, and just taking us through what happened in the film. In the show, Janice and Damien are kind of co-narrators. They get a song in the beginning introducing the show, and about 2 or 3 little scenes where they come out and talk to the audience and explain what's happening in the story. The vast majority of the show's racial humor has been taken out, and the actor they cast to originate the role of Gretchen was a Korean woman. Janice no longer gets together with a guy in the end, and generally speaking, the show is a lot more ambiguous about her sexuality. She still gets bullied for being gay and actually straight up gets called the D-slur in it, but she isn't shown to have any interest in any of the characters, and the closest thing we get to a confirmation is the notion that Regina bothering her about her sexuality wasn't a real question. An interview in the show's playbill also describes her as a lesbian, for what that's worth. There is a small subplot added where Aaron, Katie's love interest, is mentioned to be lying about his address to be able to go to the relatively wealthy school district where the story takes place. The show is also explicitly stated to take place in the modern day. God, saying modern day when I'm meaning like not 2004 is so weird. I feel like I'm crumbling to dust. But with references to memes and social media placed throughout, and some digs about modern politics and Trump and whatnot, much like with Dear Evan Hansen, there's a screen that's part of the stage and social media posts pop up on it occasionally. And finally, the show has a much more explicitly feminist lean than the film does. A lot of the moments where the characters slut-shame each other are completely taken out, and you'll often have characters like Karen make these feminist-leaning observations about whatever is going on. You also have Regina making these references, albeit with some jokes included of like, if I was a man, I wouldn't be called a bitch. I'd be called Reginald, which... that's a good line. I do like that line. But it's all very basic feminism. Stuff you'd hear as very revolutionary and shocking in 2013, but now is like, yeah, that's basic stuff. Like, wow, we should teach boys not to leak people's nudes, but it's an element of the show nevertheless. On the whole, though, the musical tends to follow mostly the same story beats as the film does. We meet Katie, she meets the art kids, she's taken in by the plastics, the art kids encourage her to sabotage them, Regina dates her ex to spite Katie, revenge happens, Katie gets more popular and worse, her friends reject her, Regina gets hit by a bus, Katie becomes a better person and gets the guy. And it very much is a lot of beat-for-beat storytelling with the introduction of a few musical numbers. With essentially the same story, the same person writing both scripts, and people who had worked on shows like Legally Blonde in the past that are broadly loved, the musical had elements that should allow it to succeed as an adaptation. But for some reason, these elements just didn't come together into a particularly strong show. I'm not sure why it was the way that it was exactly, but unfortunately it didn't really end up working. And like, again, this is all my opinion. If you really love this show or it's really meaningful to you, that's fine. I'm not saying you are bad or have bad taste or anything like that. But before talking about what doesn't end up working about this, let's first go over what in here is good. So, first things first, there are a few musical numbers that I generally like here. Notably, we have What's Wrong With Me, a song they give to Gretchen that explores her own insecurities, being this very anxious and desperate to please person in a friendship that she knows is toxic, yet still seeks to be a part of. It's a good song. Both actors I've seen in the role of Gretchen, both Ashley Park and Christina Alabado, play the character well, and there are also some pretty funny jokes in it. Like Katie just fucking leaving in the middle of Gretchen's sad song, and Gretchen just immediately still going when Katie hasn't even shut the door yet.
I'm gonna go home now. See you tomorrow! What's wrong with me?
You've also got a number like Stop, in which Damien warns Katie about obsessively texting her crush, which, while it doesn't necessarily serve the plot or reveal much about any of the characters, manages to be funny, well choreographed, and help carry the show's energy. It's a minor departure from the poppy sound of the rest of the show, and with the exception of one line in it that we are absolutely going to have to talk about later, I really enjoy this number.
Stop posting comments on YouTube. There's 4 different people that heard to lovely was pitchy. Stop! Stop, stop, stop. I really had to stop.
Regina has a good chance to shine in the song World Burn, which is a very fun villain song and one of the stronger numbers in the show, and Karen's song Sexy, about why she loves being hot on Halloween, manages to be really energetic and catchy and just fun. Generally speaking, the talent here is quite strong, and they have a few songs that really let them shine and help bring some good energy to the show. They also do a really good job with the staging and choreography. This is an element that we get to see a little bit in the movie, but there are a few moments where Katie is essentially viewing high school life through the lens of growing up around wildlife. The shopping mall is essentially like a watering hole, these parties are basically mating dances, things like that. And so there are some really fun examples of choreography that kind of incorporate Katie's perception of these events into the show. Having people emulate wildlife in their dancing, or even just in the way their arms look like bird wings in a little moment where they're all chattering and following Katie on Instagram and, dare I say, tweeting. Even beyond this aspect of the choreography, it's a very strong through line in most numbers that helps add much needed energy to the show. It's well done, and I really like it. We also got a little bit more depth to Damien's character, albeit not a huge ton, but getting to learn a little more about his life and his own interests is a robust addition to the Mean Girls canon. Hey, Sarah from the future here. I forgot to add, there is one other scene that I do really like, and this is a scene that is based on a deleted scene from the film and that is expanded, which is after everything goes down, Katie and Regina are talking in the bathroom together. Essentially, this serves as an opportunity for Regina to talk about her own feelings about everything that went down and getting hit by a bus, which we don't really get to see in the film. It's a humanizing moment for Regina, it's an interesting moment for their relationship, it's a well-written scene, I like it a lot. Finally, I'm also happy about some of the tweaks they made to the show's values. I'm glad, for example, that they named an actual country that Katie is from instead of just being like, where's she from? You know, Africa. She's from Kenya in this one, which makes sense. They also got rid of the jokes about the Asian characters. They got rid of Janice's weird last minute ending up with a guy. They had Kevin's character be less kind of creepy and sexist. Generally, they just changed up some stuff that I think was good to change up. And so with all that said, there are things that I do like here. But I think the show's attempt to change up some of its content also ended up being somewhat of a mixed bag. Because while the musical made some good calls in the removal of content that either aged poorly or just shouldn't have been in there from the start, this also came with some other removals that seemed to be designed with a similar purpose, to make the show a little bit less edgy or offensive and to promote generally progressive values. And while I do think that's a noble aim, in practice, some of this ended up working to the show's detriment. And that's the fact that it seems like the musical sort of removed a lot of the edge of the original. For context, Mean Girls has always been a bit on the raunchy side, especially compared to other teen comedies. The original script was aimed for an R rating and was only toned down once Lindsay Lohan joined, and it was decided to market it towards the teenage demographic to capitalize off of her, at the time, popularity. That being said, even with the changes done to make it PG-13, Mean Girls is still a fairly vulgar film. Maybe not necessarily in the language said, like you don't have anyone saying or whatever the hell else they want, but definitely in its attitude. Mean Girls is, well, mean-spirited. It has this attitude of not really holding back at all. It's still not as dark as something like, say, Heather's, but still is the type of movie where one of the major comedy beats is a teenage girl getting hit by a bus. And honestly, this is part of the reason why the movie works as well as it does. Besides it leading to a lot of the more memorable jokes and scenes, it really strengthens the way the characters are written. Mean Girls as a film focuses primarily on villain protagonists. It's about a seemingly innocent girl's corruption arc as she gets taken in and shaped by a bunch of selfish and hateful people. And so because of that, you want your characters to seem a little bit cruel and, well, mean. Having them be so exaggeratedly awful to each other means you end up with scenes that are funnier and characters that you feel more strongly against. I mean, there's a reason why basically every line Regina George says has become a meme.
That is the ugliest effing skirt I've ever seen.
You can see this done perfectly in Heather's, both its original film and its stage adaptation. Its TV show, not so much. Maybe someone will do a video about that someday. But yeah, Heather's is often the go-to example people cite for dark teen comedy, and for a very good reason. It's a story all about awful people that makes light of things like teenage death and homosexuality and even school shootings. But by going so over the top with it, it makes it work. You really do get a sense of just how terrible Heather Chandler is. You get a sense of how superficial the school and town are. You remember lines like, "I love my dead gay son," something that's funny because it's so out there and shocking and honestly absurd. It's satire. You exaggerate something to farcical levels in order to comment on and criticize it. And so as long as what you're arguing for is clear and good-natured at the end of the day, usually it's fine. Mean Girls the movie does this pretty well, though not going to the same levels of darkness as Heather's does or anything like that. The musical, not so much. It's hard to talk about this without coming off as some sort of boomer saying, they got rid of this thing because everyone is too offended these days, because no, that's not it. The stuff that was offensive is gone, and it's good that it's gone. But there also seems to have been some effort to remove anything that might be too blatantly upsetting that just really takes away from what made the original material engaging in the first place. Like, on one hand, yes, it's good that Regina George doesn't insult people as personally as she did in the movie, that there's less body shaming, less slut shaming, but at the same time, like, she's supposed to be the villain. She's supposed to be saying things that are wrong, and we're supposed to listen to her say these things and realize that she's saying the wrong things. And beyond any humor that could derive from watching someone awful do things that are awful, it just makes for a less compelling character. Part of what made the Plastics such compelling antagonists was that they were the alpha bitch archetypes, that they represent the snotty, vain, rich girl persona that you may have encountered in your own school and experience. You need them to be at an engaging level of hateable, not just so that you enjoy seeing them on screen, but so that you can see how their actions affect others and root for their inevitable downfall and potential character development. The Plastics lacking a lot of the bite of their film counterpart is largely an issue of show versus tell. The movie spends a lot of time with the Plastics early on so that we get a good understanding of who they are and how they're viewed and how they treat others. You get scenes like Regina calling a girl's mom and pretending to be Planned Parenthood just to get back at her for dating the boy that stood Gretchen up. We see her complimenting a girl's skirt and immediately using it to make fun of her a second later. We see how in tune they are with everyone, how knowledgeable they are, and how they can use this to manipulate others to their advantage. We see how she's able to ward off some guy who's messing with Katie and how she manages to corner her in a conversation and maintain the upper hand through complimentary condescension. We see who Regina is through her actions. Compare this to the Plastics introduction in the musical, which is Regina coming in and just saying she's a massive deal and that the school loves her. Don't care. Rather than introduce her through a clear example of how she acts and how she interacts with those around her, they're straight up just saying that she's important and that people love her and fear her, and that's it. We still do have the scene where she, stands up for Katie and pressures her to come join her clique for the day, but it's stripped of a lot of the context that makes it especially awful in the film. We no longer see her complimenting Katie's bracelet as this, insulting thing that she's doing to make fun of her. We no longer see her treating other people as poorly as she does for petty reasons. It's just very toned down. Most of the on-screen moments where we explicitly see Regina be cruel to others for no reason or because of petty revenge are both absent in the show and also not replaced with anything similar. As a result, a lot of her meanness is, toned down from the film, and her vicious pettiness is thus not given as much of an opportunity to shine beyond Regina simply telling us through her introduction that she is mean and doesn't care about others. It works, but it's way less compelling. You could argue that this is because of the conversion from film to musical, as musicals tend to be more blunt and open about these things rather than subtextual. But it didn't have to be this simple. Look at the way the Heathers are introduced in Heathers the Musical. Beyond seeing them in the opening number, we see them interact with Veronica and convince her to join their rank and forge a letter for them in order to bully another girl, and we get Candy Store, a song that showcases their cruelty, pettiness, and forcefulness while also just being fun as hell. It's letting us see their personalities first and foremost without just going, here's Heather Chandler, everyone loves her, she's really mean. And Meet the Plastics' introductory number really could have taken a lot of cues from Candy Store. It seems like that's the energy it's theoretically going for. But like the show as a whole, it lacks that edge and bite that makes something like that feel shocking and affecting, and in turn makes it stand out as a character piece. This also affects Katie's arc too, weirdly enough. Part of the whole thing is that she starts out as the sweet, innocent fish out of water and slowly becomes corrupted into being just another mean girl like the rest of them. We watch her in the film grow more and more vain, more and more deceitful, and more in love with the idea of getting petty revenge against Regina. You see Katie slowly become the mask, and how someone could even become this type of person to begin with. But in the musical, Katie is fine. She does some cringy things to get with Aaron Samuels, and she does skip out on Janice's party, but for the most part, we never really see her become as catty and unlikable as she does in the movie. She's just sort of nothing, like just not important, like she just doesn't matter. The show ends up cutting a lot of Katie's slow decline into mean girlness. We see these scenes in the film where she's constantly talking to Janice and Damien about getting revenge on Regina, complaining about her with the same lines and jokes over and over again, refusing to hang out with them in favor of sabotaging the plastics, and even really dramatically changing the way she speaks and carries herself. None of that is present in the show, and we even have characters like Karen go out of their way to talk about how nice Katie is, even when she's at the point in her story where she should be a lot meaner by now.
I like Katie. She's nice to me.
The way she speaks and delivers lines doesn't change much throughout the musical. She generally keeps her awkward but friendly demeanor throughout the entire thing.
No, do you think I'm an idiot? No, it's just gonna be a few cool people and you better be one of them, biatch.
No, do you think I'm an idiot? It's just gonna be a few cool people and you better be one of them, biatch.
Her transformation is much less dramatic, and because she's no longer narrating, her role in the entire driving sabotage plot is significantly reduced. She ends up being a very bland, kind of nothing character who is neither particularly likable nor particularly hateable, even at moments that should be her high and low points. Oh, and then Janice gets affected by this too. Like, okay, Janice is both a popular and divisive character among fans of Mean Girls. People generally like her and enjoy her character, but there's also discourse over whether or not Janice in the film is justified in her actions or if she's just her own brand of mean girl. And there is validity to that interpretation. Janice sets out on a quest to take down Regina George out of feelings of petty revenge and manipulates Katie in order to do so. Much like Regina pretends to be Katie's friend and molds her into what she wants, Janice also initially pretends to be Katie's friend just to get her to do what she wants. She explicitly tells us in her scene that she knows she's mean, that this is part of who she is.
God, see, at least me and Regina George know we're mean. You try to act like you're so innocent.
Even if you don't particularly agree with this interpretation of the character, it does play into the overall theme of the film, that girls have to stop treating each other poorly and actually get along. Movie Janice is a lot snarkier. She makes a lot more blatant insults towards Regina and the people around her. She's more active in the plot. She shows more visible disdain toward others.
Nice wig, Janice. What's it made of?
Your mom's chest hair.
She may seem like your typical selfish, backstabbing, slut-faced hoe bag.
Regina George is not sweet. She's a scum-sucking road horse. She ruined my life. Because you are a mean girl. You're a bitch.
And then musical Janice is just sort of there. Like, she still has her grudge against Regina, and she still works with Katie to do it, but a lot of her worst tendencies are just removed or ignored entirely, and she gets to sing a song in the end about how you shouldn't worry about what other people think of you, which is just kind of like, what? Isn't her whole character based on being so angry over what Regina thinks of her that she is still willing to try to use Katie to get revenge on her and ruin her life? It's like they knew some people didn't like Janice, and so in an attempt to make her more likable, they just got rid of everything about her. She's not even goth anymore. Like, it's 2021. I won't stand for goth erasure. Also, like, one other thing that I've always found a little bit weird about both the film and the show, and this isn't a specific critique of either one individually, but it's just something that surprises me that never really gets talked about. Regina in the film is quite heavily implied to have an eating disorder, and the fact that it never really gets addressed in any detail, the scheme of Janice essentially trying to make this person who hates her body secretly gain weight, is kind of wild to me. Like, don't get me wrong, the things that Katie does that Janice encourages her to do are framed as in the wrong in the narrative, but it's kind of wild that that specific thing never really gets that narrative focus besides like lol funny sabotage. This all comes with a caveat that there is one weirdly darker thing that they added into the musical that wasn't in the movie, and that's in the song Stop, in which a bunch of the students sing about things they regret doing in their life in an attempt to get Katie to stop trying to get with Aaron Samuels. And in this song, Karen sings about how when she was 13, she sent nude pictures to a boy she liked, and how the photos then got circulated and ended up on a website for underage nude photos. which is a fucking buck wild thing to introduce out of nowhere and play off as a joke. Like, the characters all move on and it's never addressed again, and it's like, what? Why was this put here? And like, Karen does turn to the audience and talk about how they need to teach boys to not share nudes and that people should think before they post, but it's still just such a fucking whiplash moment. It's not even like funny. There's not even like a punchline or like a dark joke that they add to it. It's just sort of depressing. Side note, but in general, I have mixed feelings towards how they portrayed Karen in the show. Like, on one hand, she's the one plastic who retains the most of her original personality, and she has some of the better lines and jokes of the show. On the other hand, they really play up her dumbness and stupidity to the point of all of her songs having this very simple, childlike musical style and instrumentation. It all feels really infantilizing and demeaning and weirdly more judgmental of her than the movie was, and she's the main outlier of the cast since everyone else gets flattened and made way less interesting or risque. I'm not sure exactly why they toned things down the way they did, if it was a conscious attempt to remove any potentially upsetting content, or if they thought this was a better way to market it toward teens, or if this was just the way it turned out and they weren't consciously trying to do it. But it really is a shame, especially when Heathers showed that you can make a musical that has a bit of edge to it and still have it be massively successful with a teenage audience. The sandpapering of the material isn't the only thing affecting the character arcs, though, because in a lot of respects, the way the show is presented and framed and paced is responsible as well. So, turning a movie into a musical is always going to be a bit of a challenge. I talked about this a bit in my last video, but the problem is that we generally think of films differently than we do stage shows. Films are usually around 90 minutes plus in length, and you think of them as being in 3 acts. See my co-writer Emily's newest video for a full breakdown on the 3-act structure. But stage shows are a lot longer, usually longer than 2 hours, and usually separated into 2 acts that are broken up by an intermission. Mean Girls is not a particularly long or complicated movie. It's around 90 minutes, and the plot is pretty basic and simple and surface level, and that's a good thing. It does what it needs to do, tells the story it needs to tell, makes as many jokes as it can, and then finishes off before you can get tired of it. But that doesn't necessarily work in a stage show. Like I said, you need to have that intermission, and most of the time you need to have those 2 acts. The movie may be 90 minutes, but the musical is close to 2.5 hours. And as I've said before, they didn't add much story-wise to justify this added time. There's no way you can add that much length to something without it affecting the finished product, and if you're not careful, making it feel weird. And I think the weird thing is that despite being longer, it feels more shallow than its film counterpart. On a really basic level, some of this is because of how the nature of time works on stage versus the screen. Something I talked about with the Dear Evan Hansen film is how different the plot feels when you have to see the literal and objective portrayal of what is happening on screen versus the abstract and nebulous world of theater. And how because of that, you really do notice how much time Evan spends lying and how he keeps deliberately choosing things like going over to a different house or spending time on dates with the partner he's lying to. It makes him more unlikable because everything he does suddenly seems more deliberate and premeditated. Strangely, this is the reverse situation with Mean Girls. In the film, you get a real sense of the passage of time. It starts at the beginning of the school year in the fall and ends with the spring dance. You get major events like Halloween and Christmas that give clear signifiers of how many months have passed. You learn important dates like October 3rd to let you know that it's now October and it's probably been a few months since it started. This is theoretically true of the musical as well. It still starts at the beginning of the school year and ends with the spring dance. You still get Halloween and Christmas stuff, etc. But it feels less real. Like, because the musical takes place in this nebulous zone in front of a bunch of digital screens, it's hard to really feel like much time has passed for the characters at all beyond being told such. Now, admittedly, it's a bigger challenge in this medium. You can do a montage in film way more easily than you can in a show. You can change your settings and scenery more in a film than you can in a show. You can have more costume and makeup changes in a film than in a show. It's kind of just the truth of the situation. But because of this, you don't really get a full feeling of the scope of everything in the musical. Katie messing with the plastics felt like a long, extended effort in the film, whereas in the musical, if you're not actively thinking about it, it, it very much comes off as though it could just be like a 2-week thing. And because everything is more abstract, we get less of a feeling for how every choice Katie is making is deliberate and strung out and premeditated. And this could have been made to work. You do see musicals taking place over long stretches of time. Les Mis takes place over the course of decades, as does Hamilton. The Last 5 Years is literally called The Last 5 Years. But in all of these cases, you do need to make up for being able to do less with the world around you to convey time passing. You may not be able to easily show a character looking older to demonstrate that it's been a year, or have snow on the ground around you to convey very, very easily and that sticks in your mind that a few months have gone by. But you can show that characters are more familiar with one another than they used to be, or consistently dress them differently. With Mean Girls, we don't really feel time passing because we're largely watching a bunch of people who don't really like each other and don't get closer over the time that has passed or change how they view and speak to one another. They're mostly dressed the same throughout the show, and most significantly, a lot of the early plot elements are sped through very, very quickly, meaning we don't get a mounting sense of tension or time passing. So most notably, there's this song near the end of Act 1 called Revenge Party that is really, really not good, and I don't like it, and it has these cringy as fuck lyrics, but I'll get into that later. Revenge Party is the song where Katie realizes that Regina has betrayed her and vows to work with Janice to dethrone her as head of the Plastics. On the surface, fine thing to have a song about, but part of the problem is that the song sort of just keeps going. And so it's not just about them realizing that they want to go against Regina, but also all the ways that they do it. Showing the thing with feeding her the Caltine bars, starting to reveal that she's cheating, doing this whole holiday Glen Coco scene with Gretchen. All these big plot moments in the film sort of just get thrown away into this singular song. And they happen pretty fast in the movie too, but they were also still allowed to shine as scenes. Basically, every part of the Regina sabotage plan is relegated here to this one song, which, considering that's supposed to be the main driving force of the story, means the rest of the show doesn't have much else to do, and so by the end of Act 1, Regina has been replaced by Katie as head of the Plastics. Act 1 of the show is generally like fine-ish. Like, I don't like it for a lot of the reasons I've already said, but it's fine enough on a basic level. But Act 2 really, really drags. And a lot of the reason for that is because so much of the plot was burnt through in the first act, and now they have to justify stretching out the last 30 minutes of the movie into 1 hour. We get a lot of reprises, a lot of solo songs, and not much really happening in terms of on-screen character development. With Katie's infiltration of the Plastics taking up, at best, 10 minutes of total production time, we don't really get enough time with her to feel as though any of the shit that gets thrown her way in Act 2 is justified because, once again, she's sort of fine here, not really much of a bitch at all. It drags the whole thing down and makes it really dull. There are also just general issues with the framing here. Like I said earlier, for some reason Janice and Damien start the show as like the main narrators / Greek chorus or whatever, but then they only do that again in like 1 or 2 songs, and it's doubly weird because not only was Katie already the narrator of the original film, the musical has several moments where Katie does stop and begin to narrate and explore her inner monologue via asides directly to the audience. It's super inconsistent which viewpoint we're supposed to be seeing this from, and it feels really sloppy, like something they didn't put much thought into. And then there's the awkward way that film quotes are inserted into the book. Like, Mean Girls has a lot of memorable, famous lines, and it would be weird to do a musical that didn't have them. But they feel very forced in here. In the best of times, it feels as though Tina Fey hit Control-C and Control-V and just moved stuff over from her original screenplay and pasted it. In the worst moments, it feels like a line being said at a quote-along party.
Whatever, I'm getting cheese fries. Ex-boyfriends are off limits to friends. It's just like the rules of feminism.
It has the same energy as when you're watching Star Wars and someone says a famous Star Wars line and it's not really funny or anything, and the only way you can react is, wow, yeah, that's the line from Star Wars. And the worst part is that these are mostly the only jokes in the show. Like, there aren't that many attempts to make jokes that aren't just callbacks to the movie, and with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 lines here that get a laugh, nothing new is really significantly funny or memorable. Nothing that sets it apart in order to justify the existence of this adaptation. Nothing that it tries to do new with its premise, at least in the way of comedy. And speaking of awkward and forced, the songs are bad, which is a huge factor against the musical. Obviously, music is subjective and some people might like these, but these are just the most bland numbers possible. They're all very low energy, like even the most upbeat songs don't have much of a spark to them. There are a lot of solo songs and character-specific numbers, which would be fine on paper, but considering how the songs aren't that good and don't go that in-depth on any of the characters anyway, it all starts to feel like filler. It gets to the point where every time it seems like they're going to do a song, it starts to feel like a threat. These songs rarely serve to advance the plot, but rather stall it until it's over and the show can move on to the next scene from the movie. But that's not the worst part of these songs. The reason a lot of them don't work, beyond any sort of opinions on the melodies or choreography or anything, are the lyrics. And the lyrics are... ugh. The lyrics for Mean Girls being so bad is very strange. Jeff Richmond and Nell Benjamin can write musical songs fine. Again, Benjamin worked on Legally Blonde, and that doesn't really have any particularly bad instances of egregious music. They do rhyme working with you in one number, but otherwise, the lyrics generally range from serviceable to good. For instance, Gayer European was funny, and it was a joke that wasn't in the film, and is considered an iconic element of the show now. They did something with their premise that wouldn't have worked well in a movie and didn't exist, and it sets it apart. I can't necessarily say that there are any incredible standout lines that I'm still thinking about in the show or anything like that, but they can do a good job writing lyrics, which is why some of the choices in Mean Girls sincerely baffle me. There's like one little pun where Katie is singing about liking a guy and how the only thing she's good at is math, and she says she's filled with calculus, which is a joke I like very much. And sometimes when I listen to these lyrics, I am utterly convinced they spent the first 95% of their time thinking of this one pun and then had to rush through writing everything else in like 5 minutes. The trapped in this and fabulous rhyme, pretty good too. Those are literally the only 2 instances I can think of where I saw a lyric and I was like, that's a good lyric. So for those of y'all who are unfamiliar with the show, I'm just going to read through some of the lyrics in Mean Girls and y'all can draw your own conclusions.
As right as it might seem, to overshare, troll, or meme, that's just low self-esteem.
Mean is easier than nice. This whole school humps my leg like a chihuahua. Like a lioness, only with less fur. Don't mess with her.
I learned math, so I can learn love. Imagine a party with dresses and cake and singing and dancing and cake. It's a revenge party with your 2 best friends. It's like a party with revenge is what it's like.
I don't need their good opinions. I have plenty of opinions. Everybody has opinions, but that doesn't make them true.
I won't twist in knots to join your game. I will say you make me mad, and if you treat me bad, I'll say you're bad.
Side note, but those last 3 sets of lyrics are from the song I'd Rather Be Me, which is this inspirational song sung by Janice about how you should be yourself and not worry about the haters, and how Janice wishes we didn't have to be underhanded, and how she just wants to be direct, and her tactic is just to tell people to fuck off if they're mean to her. Which, first of all, no. This song isn't earned in the first place because even with the defanging of Janice's character, it doesn't ring true for her. There's this entire section in the bridge where she talks about how she refuses to play the game of popularity and gossip, and that even though she's mad at people like Katie and Regina, she's not the type of person to laugh and celebrate when the beast of popularity comes for them too. 'Cause that's not me. And like, yes it is. Laughing and celebrating because Regina got her life ruined is not only absolutely what Janice does, but there's actually, an entire song about it. Katie doing underhanded Mean Girl shit and talking about Regina behind her back and trying to sabotage her life is quite literally Janice's idea in the movie and in the musical. So this song doesn't work for Janice. It would be one thing if she was trying to convince somebody else that she is not mean, or if this was like an unreliable narrator situation, but this song is played completely straight as inspirational, and it's also just exceptionally cynical. Like, it feels like this song was put in the show not because it fits Janice's character or tells us anything new about her, but because a lot of theater kids are awkward and bullied, and a song that says it's okay to be weird and unconventional will be popular with those kids and make them easier to market to. The song doesn't narratively fit in the show, but it certainly does appeal to that demographic. Even the music video they made for this song, where Barrett Wilbert Weed is singing about how bullying is bad to this cast of teenagers half her age and dunking on this fictional popular girl who's like 15, and this awkward bullied teen is taking solace in her song, really highlights this and honestly feels deeply manipulative. So yeah, this song really doesn't work. But on top of that, these lyrics are also just all generally not well written. These are the most egregiously embarrassing ones I could find, but on the whole, the lyrics in this show rely on being overly simplistic, employing super awkward phrasing to force a rhyme, or just saying weird, unfunny shit like the school humping Regina's leg like a chihuahua. Generally speaking, the most common defense of lines like acted nice when she not nice is that, well, these characters are teenagers. They aren't the best at choosing their words, they're going to say things that are simple or weird or repetitive, and this is essentially the lyrical equivalent of Buffy speak, where characters say stuff like thingy or forget words for stuff or use bad metaphors. But this just isn't a good execution of that concept, because on some basic level, lyrics are a foundational element of theater, and it's generally necessary that they be good. If your lyrics are bad, even if there is a deeper justification for why, you didn't succeed on some level as a musical. And I'm not against having lyrics convey character. I think this is essentially always the case for a good show. The lyrics are going to tell us something about the way characters think and feel and express themselves, but this isn't the way to do it. If you want to have this work, to have characters in songs be overly direct or bad at finding words for things, there is a way to pull this off while still creating songs that are lyrically interesting. Take something like Come Home With Me from Hadestown, a number where the character of Orpheus meets this girl Eurydice and instantly falls in love. His lines start out being very simple and overly direct. He introduces himself to her with simply, "Come home with me." He answers her questions with these very short, simple statements. He's being awkward, these back and forth lines directly conveying his own inability to properly express himself to her yet. But that works because, one, the lines are at least partly played for laughs and they are written to be reflections of Orpheus's awkwardness. Two, Hadestown is sung through and this is explicitly written to be dialogue rather than a reflection of a character's internal state like it is in Mean Girls. And three, this is a character-specific thing to Orpheus and how he feels in this one particular moment, rather than overly simplistic lyrics existing across the board. Other characters are still allowed to be clever and witty and poetic in this number, and we see Orpheus himself grow in confidence throughout the song and show, which keeps the song dynamic and character-focused, rather than just a song that has universally bad lyrics like it is in Mean Girls. And there are actually times in Mean Girls where this does work fine. Karen is introduced with very simplistic, repetitive lyrics and a simple melody to convey that she is not a very smart or verbose person. But for the most part, these bad lyrics are just bad lyrics, ones that exist across the board for all characters, thrust into situations that should be opportunities for cool plot stuff or deeper character explorations to happen. And when tons of musicals feature teenagers and are able to do more lyrically interesting things than Mean Girls does, that doesn't end up being a compelling reason why Mean Girls had to be like this. There are also just some lyrical choices that feel odd, and much like a lot of the Janice stuff, feel less like they exist to develop a character or further the plot in a way that makes sense, and more like they're put in there for mass appeal or for a laugh where they don't really work. Like, there's this line in Karen's song Sexy, a song I generally like, that has this weird, sarcastic dig at modern feminism and doesn't really fit there. Karen's song had nothing to do with feminism. Karen never calls herself a feminist. The song isn't broadly about women's roles in the world in general. Just a really odd choice that doesn't fit well into Sexy. Which, there are all of these lines, and all of the characters who are plastics make these references to feminism that are mostly played straight. I think that if they wanted to have that kind of message and update it a little, one of the things they could have explored is how a lot of Mean Girls now use the language of feminism in order to further propel their own meanness. this. I can definitely think of some examples when I was in school of like people using progressive messaging in order to shit on other girls, in order to be bitchy, in order to be cliquey. I think that they could have played on these characters' exploitation of feminist values if that was something that they wanted to dive a little bit deeper into. But they didn't do that either, so it's just this very weird, jarring lyrical choice that feels like it was thrown in there to make this modern feminism dig, not because it fits the character or song. When the music isn't just embarrassingly bad, it's often just kind of nothing. I talked earlier about how at times the show really drags and as a result is jam-packed with a lot of filler numbers. This isn't always awful. Sometimes you get a song like Stop that doesn't serve much of a purpose but is fun and energetic. But other times these songs just have these very repetitive and one-note melodies and lyrics and instrumentation. Take the song Fearless, which is their big Act 1 finale number after Katie ousts Regina from the Plastics. Not only is the chorus just the phrase fearless over and over again, it's just generally not an interesting song. It's largely just an inspirational happy number about how free everyone is, played completely straight, save for Regina popping in at the end to sing a reprise. This could have been an opportunity for them to be a bit sarcastic with it, to further show the dark side of Katie's choices, but instead it's just a really monotonous poppy song. Or a number like I See Stars, which is just filled with these really basic rhymes and melodies and doesn't really say anything interesting or stay in your head for any time after it's done. It's not horrible, there's nothing in here that's egregious, but it's very, very forgettable. And on a worse note, you've got the rap song they do when Katie goes to the math competition, or the song they sing when they have a house party, which I don't have much to say about except that they aren't good. They largely just exist as filler to pad out an already thin second act, and they aren't particularly good filler at that. It's really disappointing that they seem to have eschewed the idea of making any interesting choices at all for the music in Mean Girls. On one hand, the songs don't necessarily need to include a lot of complicated key changes or lyrics that are difficult to sing in order for the show to be good. I think that some of the reason the songs are what they are is that this show seemed to be specifically designed with licensing in mind. This is all just speculation, but I'm very much leaning toward the idea that this show was written largely so that it could be licensed for high schools to perform. I mean, you could make a compelling argument that Legally Blonde is more known nowadays for how it was licensed out to high schools rather than any notoriety from its original Broadway run, and that had one of the same songwriters. Like, I very much associate Legally Blonde with being a show done by high schoolers more than anything else. And in that sense, it makes sense that these would be songs that aren't necessarily difficult for high school age actors to learn and sing. But in a landscape where young adult musicals have become so incredibly popular, the musical ends up having a lot of competition that easily eclipses it in terms of music quality. I think there are a lot of ways they could have kept this show simple for high schoolers while still introducing some clever lyrics or refining the music, and I'm disappointed that that didn't end up happening. I really did want to like Mean Girls. I think it had a lot of key ingredients that made the film succeed, and I don't think this was the kind of production that was doomed from the start in the same way something like Tom Hooper's Cats was. The film was funny. There were things it could have improved on, but the musical could have been an opportunity to bring it into this even more heightened setting, to play off of the school environment in the way a show like Heathers does. So the fact that Mean Girls really didn't do that here was just disappointing to me. A lot of the bite and edge from the show ended up being absent, eliminating some of the harsher realities of life in girl world. The rampant slut-shaming, for example, doesn't necessarily further a progressive message, it just weakens the show's honesty. It's harder to explore anti-bullying stories when the bullying itself is so sanitized. It's paced and presented in a very odd way, a way that doesn't feel like an extensive amount of thought was put into it. Many of the characters just have the edge taken off them, whether it's Katie not really having a personality or Janice existing in the story mostly as a pleasant, ambiguously gay art girl who exists to deliver a song about putting your middle finger up at preps. The songs broadly feel exceptionally low effort, and the fact that there are so many musical numbers here to pad out the story means that when the songs are bad, you feel it hard. And for me, the fact that this show could have been good makes these problems hurt a lot more. There are things I like about this musical. It had the potential to really succeed, and so it's very disappointing to see what it became. A very pale imitation of its source material that can't stand on its own without it, that at best provokes secondhand enjoyment from reminding you of the thing it almost is. It's worth mentioning that the Mean Girls musical was created in the climate of a pretty significant theater trend right now, the trend of Thing the Musical. In the last few years before Broadway and the rest of the world kind of shut down, we were in the midst of a pretty large wave of these very aggressively mediocre, by-the-numbers stage musical adaptations of existing films. You're seeing shit like Amelie the Musical and Tootsie the Musical and Pretty Woman the Musical, or right now you're seeing Mrs. Doubtfire the Musical. With that said, on the better end of this trend, you have shows that are actually good and try to do something new, like Waitress or Groundhog Day or Beetlejuice. Essentially though, we are very much in an era where we're seeing a lot of films get Broadway adaptations, not because they have something especially new to do with the story or because they think theater is an especially good medium of communicating the story, but rather just because these are very safe narratives to adapt. These shows generally don't take many creative risks, have incredibly basic soundtracks, and don't do much new with their premise. They are essentially the Illumination pictures of musicals. And as much as I wish I could say Mean Girls fits in with the Waitress / Groundhog Day / Beetlejuice contingent of recent adaptations that try to be creative and interesting and have heart put into them that justify their existence, it unfortunately fits much better into that former category. A lot of its choices feel at best mediocre and at worst actively cynical, rather than a show with love and drive and ambition put into it. And if someone connects with this show and it makes them feel happy or seen or less lonely, then good. I'm glad theater can do that, and I hope that people who love this show go on loving it. But at least to me, Mean Girls the Musical doesn't feel like a musical designed to connect with folks or make them feel things. It feels like a cynical cash grab designed to profit off of young people's love of Mean Girls. It's the Dr. Perky to the film's Dr. Pepper. It's designed to evoke your recognition of the original, to bring you the joy that comes from remembering the thing it imitates, but it just doesn't taste the same. With any luck, someone will make a non-musical play adaptation of the musical movie, and someone will do a musical adaptation of that, and we'll just get to suffer through a cycle of gradually more unrecognizable Mean Girls adaptations until somehow it turns back into a self-help book. I did a lot of talking in this video about theater, and if you're interested in theater, you might also be interested in Debater Theater, an exclusive video I've made for my streaming service Nebula. Debater Theater is a special video about how to better use arguments to persuade others, with lots of cool examples like showing how people use debating skills in movies, the news, and even award acceptance speeches. I used to be a debater and debate coach, and so getting to make a video like that was really fun, and it's still something that I'm very proud of. If you'd like to watch it, you can check it out on Nebula. Nebula is a collaborative streaming platform between me and tons of other creators like Tierzoo, Lindsay Ellis, Legal Eagle, and many more. It's a really great platform for educational and informative content, especially content that isn't best suited for YouTube because of copyright or monetization issues. For example, my last video, the one on Dear Evan Hansen, included more fair use clips and visuals from the show when you watched it on Nebula. You also get early access to my videos and get to watch them without the ads or sponsor segments when you watch them on Nebula. Nebula has also partnered with CuriosityStream, a streaming service with thousands of exciting documentaries that address our desire to learn and focus on things like science, history, and technology. Signing up for CuriosityStream gets you access to Nebula, and the best part is that right now for the holiday season, they have this honestly incredible deal going on right now where the bundle is 42% off for the annual plan. That means that instead of $19.99, you can actually get an entire year of Nebula and CuriosityStream for just $11.59. So if you're interested in watching Debater Theater, watching mine and tons of other creators' videos early and ad-free, watching any other exclusive content by your favorite creators, or getting access to the thousands of educational documentaries you can find on CuriosityStream, just head to curiositystream.com/SarahZ and use my code SarahZ at signup. That's curiositystream.com/SarahZ. to everyone who's still around. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the credits. I just wanted to let people know that if you like this Respect Women juice mug that I am drinking in this video, you can actually get it at my merch store, and you can find the link to that in the description. You can also get stuff like these really cool Sarah Zed stickers and enamel pins. I think you can still get the Tea is Gay shirt on there. I'll have to double check. So if you're interested in like this very cool mug or anything else Sarah Zed branded, also just like a very cute mug, the holiday seasons are coming up, so if anybody you know would like to drink some Respect Women juice, you can order it for them. You can find the merch link in my description. All right, thank you so much.